Hello everyone, welcome you to the next session. Here we are going to explain the most simple, the main terminology and definitions from the nanotechnology. In this session, the group defined as Nano Nerds has each the talk about one topic, which is structured in that way from the easy to more to more difficult, that we can follow from the definition to the application of nanoparticles. The requirements to participants was to give a talk 5.5 minutes long with 3 slides, and we start then with the first one. Svetlana Ohiyenko, please welcome you. She would tell us how small nano is.
Yeah, thanks. So, hi everyone. I'm Svetlana Ohiyenko, PhD, research fellow and lecturer in Kharkiv National University. So, let's talk how small is nano. I think most of you have already known something about nano, but let's explain your knowledge to the biological canvas. As you can see at the left part of the slide, nano is all around us. It should be noted that nature provides many examples of nano, and also, as we say about nano as a nanotechnological aspect, we need to begin with the Nobel laureate who presented his lecture in 1959. And the next slide, please. Thank you. So, what we know about nano today? Nano deals with tiny components. Nano is units of a meter, and it's measured in nanometer. Knowing how difficult to image just small is nano, let's discuss some examples. So, look at your hand. I think all of you see them, yeah? This situation is real because our hand is about 100 million nanometers. But it doesn't that our hand is too big, but it means that nano is too small, and the size is called macro. Move on to the next example. All we know that our blood consists of many cell types, and most of them are red blood cells. It should be noted that we can see the cells by our naked eyes, but we can see them in light microscopy. And this situation is real because the size of the cells is 2000 nanometers, and also the size is called micro. And finally, we move on to the nano size. In this slide, you can see a model of sugar molecule. Just a model because we can see atoms and some molecules. And the size of this molecule is about 1 nanometer. And as usual, they can see these objects neither by our naked eyes or light microscopy, but they can modulate their size like this. So if we sum up this part, we can see that our organism consists of many different nano structures, but we can see them. On the other hand, we can see the result of combination of all of these nano structures. And the next slide, please. The other way to help in understanding how small is nano is following. We can try to measure some objects like this. You can see different objects such as viruses, cells, bacterium, some others, and as you can see, they have different size. Let's start with viruses. As we say about viruses, they are most objects in this slide. But we need to remember that viruses, particles are not living organisms. And as we say about living organism, there are bacteria. As you can see, the smallest cell, red blood cell, has size is 200,000 nanometer, but bacterium has a size just 12,000 nanometers. And if they say about this slide, we can see that nano is too tiny as we compare as other objects which we can see. So, I mean, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I love this two-step approach to compare the sizes because directly jump to the nanoscale, it's very difficult. And thank you for the presenting. We are red blood cells that we can gradually come down. So, is there any questions? So, nerds, you know now how small is nano? Yeah?
Oh,
at least.
Great. Thank you.
And now, please welcome colleague Olesa. You, hi. Colleague Olesa will tell us about the history of nanotechnology, how it started and developed. Please, for the changing the slides, please tell next slide, please. And if you need, it's too far away. It's not that work. But if you need the light laser, this button, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Olesa Kulik. I am working as a research scientist in Institute for Single Crystals. My research interests are represented on the slide. Okay, next slide. My today's short talk is devoted to history of nanotechnology. So, how old is nanotechnology? The earliest evidences of nanotechnology and its application is traced back to ancient world. And the first example is the Argos cup from British Museum collection. This cup represents the famous example of dichroic glass, which changed the color from green to yellow. So this cup appears green. You see it. Sorry, where is it? Okay. Green in the reflected light and red-purple in the transmitted light. This effect is explained by the presence of silver and gold nanoparticles. The next click. A similar effect is observed in late medieval church windows. And next click. The next example we see in luster ceramic glazes used in the Islamic world and later in Europe. This glowing and glittering effect of glazes is also explained by the presence of silver, copper, and other metallic nanoparticles. And click, please. And the next example is more interesting since here we have a sword made from so-called Damascus steel. And this steel contains carbon nanotubes and nanowires that provide the extra strength and resilience to the metal. So you see, the nanotechnology have been extensively used by people in the ancient world. And next click, please. And the modern era of nanotechnology started from the experiments of Michael Faraday, who prepared and studied the properties of colloidal suspensions of gold nanoparticles, so-called colloidal ruby gold. And next click. The main concepts and ideas of nanotechnology were introduced by Richard Feynman. His talk, there is plenty of room at the bottom, described a vision of using machine to construct smaller machine in order to arrange the atoms the way we want. And this lecture gave the birth to the main concept of nanotechnology. And the next click. After 15 years after that, Japanese scientist Norio Taniguchi defined the term nanotechnology. And you can see it in the slides. Nanotechnology consists of the processing, separation, consolidation, and the formation of materials by one atom or one molecule. The next one, please. Eric Drexler continued to popularize and to develop the nanotechnology in 1980s through his speeches and books. And the most famous book is Engines of Creation, New Era Coming of Nanotechnology. And the next click. The nanotechnology got a dynamic push with the invention of scanning tunneling microscopy. Two scientists from Sweden invented this type of microscopy, and they were later awarded with Nobel Prize in Physics for this invention. And next click. One more important Nobel Prize winning discovery was the discovery of fullerene. Fullerene is the molecule resembling a soccer ball in shape and composed entirely from carbon, like graphite and diamond. The next, please. 5 years later, IBM scientists used scanning tunneling microscope to manipulate 35 individual xenon atoms on a nickel substrate and formed IBM logo. This was the first example demonstrating the possibility to manipulate with atoms at nanoscale. The next click, please. In 1991, Japanese physicists discovered the carbon nanotubes using transmission electron microscopy. And the strength and flexibility of carbon nanotubes found a lot of different nanotechnological applications. And the next. After the discovery of graphene in 2004, carbon-based nanomaterials, they became one of the most important field in science and engineering. And the last click. Yes, and I would like to finish my presentation with this nice picture demonstrated the nanoscale car, the first nanoscale car constructed in 2006. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there any questions?
Maybe you comment how this car drives.
Not sure that I know the mechanism, but I know that this is fullerenes, wheels, they are fullerenes. But how it works, sorry, no, I don't know the mechanism.
I think there's the junction between the two forward or backwards wheels as a rotatable bond, and so in different magnetic fields it can move. Yeah, yes, pretty fancy nano car.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you
a lot. So we now know that nanotechnology is not that young, even it was defined in 1970s. So please, Chebotar Galina, you are next, and you will talk us about the difference about nano materials
and bulk materials.
Yeah. Yes. So please, this button for the laser and
Okay. Hello, my name is Galina, and I am working. Now I am on maternity leave, but actually I am working in Odessa National Mechnikov University. And I'm more slightly connected to work with serials, not actually with the person, but as I am a lecturer, of course, some biomedical lectures we also have, and I'm also interested in this part. Please, the next slide. The topic is nanoparticles versus bulk material. Actually, the first speaker told nanoparticles are really tiny. Yes, they are. The size of nanoparticles are about 1 to 100 nanometers. If we want to, the atom of zinc oxide is about 32 nanometers, and the atom of zinc is about 0.28 nanometers. So they are like nanoparticles are in 100 times bigger than atoms, but they are really tiny, of course. Connected to the bulk material, they are about 100 nanometers in all dimensions, so they are bigger. And actually, we can't see nanoparticles with our naked eyes, but we could see the bulk materials with our naked eyes. As an example of nanoparticles, we can point nanozymes, titanium dioxide nanoparticles, graphene, as it was told by previous lecture. And as an example of bulk material, we can point as plaster, sand, ore, salts, everything bigger, much bigger. Of course, we can point then nanoparticle. It's like a collection of a few molecules. It could be 3 or about not more than 100 or something like 100 molecules. But bulk material, it's like from 1,000 molecules to the infinite. So they are really much bigger. Of course, this influence on the electronic structure of these both materials, and that's why it's different. On the geometric structure, and maybe one of the most prominent thing, what we should know, that properties of nanomaterials, they are really size dependent. But bulk materials have constant physical properties. Next one, please. Of course, all this dependent from this unique small size properties, it influence on all other on all other things where we could use nanomaterials. For example, nanoparticles, they are more resistant to corrosion than bulk material. Of course, one of the main ideas of nanoparticles is that they have a larger surface area than bulk particles, and this larger surface area brings that they also have the bigger ratio between larger surface area to volume compared to the same material in bulk, and this also influences on all their properties. Because of their properties, they possess lower melting point, and splintering takes place at lower temperature and in shorter time than for bulk material. They have less mechanical defects, and their wear resistance is 170 times higher than resistance for bulk material. Of course, they have some unique optical properties. For example, zinc oxygen nanoparticles, they have higher UV blocking property compared to the bulk material, and this zinc oxide, it's also it is white, and when you point it on skin, it's not visible. So that's why it's more used for sunscreens, like for people prefer this kind of surface covering. Of course, interesting is that the behavior of bulk materials could be changed, but these changes can't go inside the nanoparticles. So inside the nanoparticles, it's impossible to change. As I told about UV blocking properties, it's also connected to the optical properties. Absorption of solar radiation in photovoltaic cells containing nanoparticles are higher than in the film, which contain from the bulk materials. Electrical properties of nanoparticles are increased by 3 times if we connect it to the bulk materials. also decrease electrical conductivities. Suspension of nanoparticles is possible because they have a higher surface area, but for bulk material it's impossible. And it's interesting that the elastic property of nanomaterials are different from that of bulk because of the presence of increased fraction of defects. So maybe to assume all that I have told, we should remember that nanoparticles, they are really small, and all their unique properties, they are connected to their size, shape, and structure. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Is there any questions? No. Okay. Thank you a lot. I think it's very important to understand that from material point of view, it's the same, but the structure, the added structure at nanoscale makes nanoparticles special. Okay. Next, please welcome Ivana Kostina with the talk on the types of nanoparticles.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ivana Kostina, and I'm a biology master student at Kharkiv University now. And my main research interest is cell biology, but I also have working with nanoparticles and how they interact with erythrocytes. So I know a bit about it, so I would like to tell about it. So, next slide, please. Yeah, so about types of nanoparticles. But at all, nanoparticles is a small things, like small materials that are from 1 to 100 nanometers. So that's why it's nano. And we have particles like inorganic and organic from this size. And you can see from here you can see inorganic things, and there is organic things. And inorganic nanoparticles can be silver, gold, calcium phosphide, iron oxide, and carbon nanotubes. And organic nanoparticles are also different, and I know more about liposomes use. So can you move to the next slide? Yeah, so organic nanoparticles we can see here. So dendrimers, it's like small structures. They are symmetric, so they're usually three-dimensional, and all these organic nanoparticles usually used for delivering drugs and vaccines into the cell. So sometimes you can use it for usually you need it for penetrating the membrane of the cell, and inorganic nanoparticles used for entrancing sometimes the core of the cell to deliver, for example, different DNA or something like this. And here you can see in dendrimers small red points. It's a drug or something that you want to put in the cell, into the cell. Also, you see micelles. It's a lipid-based molecule, like not molecule, but structure. And the next one is liposomes, and they are also lipid-based. And ferritin is usually a protein with parts of ferrum, iron. Next slide, please. So about inorganic nanoparticles, usually we put inorganic nanoparticles in organic nanoparticles, and we can inorganic nanoparticles sometimes can be toxic, but gold, calcium phosphide, and carbon nanotubes, they're usually less toxic than another, and also gold nanoparticles sometimes can be ultra nanoparticles, because then less than 10 nanometers we can call ultra nano particles. Yeah, the next slide. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there any questions? No? With which type of nanoparticles are you working?
I would like to work with phosphate nanoparticles in my
Calcium phosphate or?
calcium phosphate. So I would like to work with it and how they can penetrate the cell and how can they penetrate the core and about
Which structure do they have?
usually so I usually work now with cells, so I'm not really into chemistry, so I know that we loading the liposome with these nanoparticles and would push it in the
Okay, so it's
in the cell, yeah, and that's why we need a lipid
surface.
yeah.
Okay, so stay tuned. On Friday, we would have a lecture on calcium phosphate nanoparticles from Dr. Victoria Sokolova. So
Okay,
maybe it would
great.
be interesting
Thank
contact
you.
for you.
One more question.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, please.
So the ultra nanoparticles, we wouldn't call picoparticles?
How?
Picoparticles?
I never heard of it, but it's a good idea. Decent explanation. Yeah? The next after nano.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, welcome, please, Palienko Konstantin. It's you. Hi. You are going to explain us what are magnetic nanoparticles.
Yep.
Super. Please.
Hello, everybody. Now I give an answer to the three questions. First, who I am and who posted the photos in the application folder.
Thank you for this.
So,
Keep
this-
doing it.
yeah. Second is, my name is Kostya Polyenko, and my interest play in the ground nanoparticles neurotoxicity, toxins of natural and artificial nature, and also organic synthesis like a hobby. I am a PhD student in Palladian Institute of Biochemistry. I am from Kyiv. And second question, what is magnetic nanoparticles? So it's like a nanoparticles, but which access the magnetic properties. So you can apply the magnet and may affect the nanoparticles and conclude it in all one point and in the different applications in different spheres we can apply like a drug, like toxic materials, like pigments for different paints, etc. So dependent on the shell of the nanoparticles, which we can affect by the different organic synthesis, we can apply this nanoparticle in different spheres of our life. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yes. And third question is how to these nanoparticles can be applied in medicine or like biology. You can see that we have different ways of interactions with our body and our fluids, and independence of the core or and shell. We can divide it into the therapy or diagnostics. Also, we can combine these two spheres into the one, so we can apply as a theranostics with therapy and diagnostics. So it can be targeting, it can be imaging, it can be MRI imaging, it can be different types of imaging, diagnosis of cancer, diagnosis of water stability, water different characteristics, for example, ecological statistics and etc. So thank you for attention. If you have questions, you can ask.
Is there any question? Could you please explain this video on the second slide, where these magnetic particles were gathering around to the magnet? Are those free magnetic particles or already in some shell?
Thank you for the question. So it is a particles which contains the core of the nickel boride, which I synthesized on the last week, and you see that it has magnetic properties. According to your question with the shell, my answer no. So these nanoparticles have not a shell. By the way, it's not obvious for me have the shell or the no.
Okay, it would be my next question, whether you can differentiate. Would be the color changed by the addition of the shell?
Color?
The color of the nanoparticle.
Color.
Or the shell is transparent then? That's tiny.
I think that the size may affect and the content of the core may affect the color of nanoparticles. So,
and the shell wouldn't be.
Shell, I think also, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then when you remove the magnet, it would be against the colloid solution of the nanoparticle? They return to exact size or they agglomerate?
In this case, actually no, because of it's crude nanoparticles, so they aggregate very prominent, and I think that we should apply the shell for the preventing of aggregation and coagulation. So no.
Okay, yeah. So it's one step in the preparation. That increase later the biological application. Okay, then thank you.
Just short to note to you and to all, you are on YouTube live.
Of course, yeah, we live stream and everything. Tell your friends and family. So thank you a lot.
Thank you.
So next, please welcome Volodymyr Vasilkovsky. Come here, please. Who will tell us about synthesis of nanoparticles, how we can synthesize them. Yeah, only for the laser then, please.
Yeah. Hello everyone, my name is Volodymyr Vasilkovsky. I'm a PhD student of the Institute for Scintillation Materials of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Also, I'm part of the laboratory of the Analytical Optical Chematronics of Kharkiv National University of Radioelectronics. My research interest is research of the use of nanomaterials and in electrochemical analytical systems, namely in electrochemical and electrochemical descent analysis. And today I will tell you about the synthesis of nanomaterials. There are a big number of methods for synthesis, and depending on which type of nanomaterials do we need, we choose them. There are a lot of methods, but they divide into two big groups. Next slide, please. They divide in two groups. Methods that use top-down approach. When we have a bulk material, some big crystal or micro particle, and we obtain smaller particle. Next slide, please. We have bottom-up approach when we have smaller particles like atoms, and we grow and we construct from these atoms nanoparticles. Previous slide, please. Previous slide, please. Now I will tell you briefly about some of the methods. The basis of top-down approach, for your better understanding, is mechanical milling. When we have bulk powder and with this ball milling, we create nanoparticles. We can create them even by hand, when we take something and we can just mill it for some amount of time and we can get nanoparticles. But the dispersion of sizes can be different, and this method is just the basis. Also there are other methods. For example, electroexplosion. In such device we have a small metallic wire, and after the application of current, metallic wire heats up really fast, and this heating create electrical explosion. And the products of such explosion can create nanoparticles. Also, we can make some microparticles by etchants. We can etch them to nano-sized particles. And in my opinion, one of the most perspective ways of creating nanoparticles via top-down method is laser ablation synthesis. In few words, it's for such synthesis we need target material. It can be it's just a clean material and picosecond laser. With this beam we create plasma, and from this plasma we can get nanoparticles. These nanoparticles are very clean. We don't need any precursors during the synthesis, and it can be performed in vacuum, in liquid, and in gases. Next slide, please. And after the influence of laser beam, we create nanoparticles. Also, we can use plants to synthesize nanoparticles, or part of plants that can capture these ions into nanoscale size particles. Also, Zolgel method, it's a chemical method, and ligand-assisted retrocipitation. This is, on the slide you can see halide perovskites, with which I research as a luminophores. And here you can see that ligands capture our nanoparticles here. We need this because without these ligands, our nanoparticles will dissolve in our solvents. So, thank you for your attention.
Exact 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you. Is there any question? Yeah, please.
Please, at least two techniques obtaining of those nanoparticles, like laser pyrolysis and explosion, are associated with such non-regulated processes. And what about the quality control of the nanoparticles? Means can you control the sizes and properties of those nanoparticles?
Yes, of course. By varying of the intensity of our laser beam environment, because we can use different gases inside or liquid. In the case of laser ablation synthesis, we can change the parameters of obtained nanoparticles. Also, there can be also filtration after after the synthesis, and they can be another processes to clean them and to obtain clean nanoparticles with sizes that we need.
Okay, thank you once more time. And next, please welcome Oniko Ilya, who will tell us about safety of nanoparticles, especially biosafety, that recently, especially this year, became very important, very discussable. As they say.
Hi everyone, my name is Oniko Ilya, or Elijah if you prefer in English. I'm from Kharkiv National University, from Department of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology, and today I would like to discuss potential risks of nanoparticles and the way how we can manage them. Next slide, please. So the field that studies impact, potential risks and safety evaluation of nanoparticles is called nanotoxicology. If we say it shortly, if nanoparticles are safe or not, it is determined by type of nanoparticles, including their chemical composition, by their size, shape, solubility, or intake routes. For example, through inhalation, injection, or by skin contact. Next slide. Mostly information that we have about nanomaterials in nanomedicine is based on either in vitro cell culture studies or in vivo animal experiment stages, mostly on rodents. There are a few human clinical trials, and they are mostly aren't focused on biosafety or adverse effects of nanoparticles. Next slide. A general rule is that smaller particles are more toxic than bigger particles. The less their size, the more barriers they can cross, and the more structures they can influence. Among human clinical trials that were actually conducted and published in open journals, it is evident that soft particles are less toxic than solid and hard particles, so it is not universal. Next slide, please. There are several possible properties of nanoparticles. First, small particle size determines extremely large surface area per mass. It in turn determines increased reactivity, so it results in increased inflammatory and pro-oxidant activity of nanoparticles. Certain nanoparticles, for example, carbon black, titanium dioxide, and carbon nanotubes, they may be carcinogenic. Some studies do not support this, but they are officially included on the list of potentially carcinogenic structures to humans. Next, one of the most common toxic effects is leakage of metal ions from the nanoparticle core. Depending on chemical composition, they may be toxic right away or when they accumulate in very high concentrations. And finally, nanoparticles can also evade organisms' defense mechanisms. And while they may be specifically engineered to avoid immune system response to head where they need to head, lacking as well as excessive interaction, it may result in safety concerns as well. Next slide, please. After heading into the body, nanoparticles are capable to easily translocate cellular barriers and reach circulating blood. From there, they distribute throughout the organisms, and being insoluble, they may stay there for a long time, like 1 year and more. They are taken up mainly into liver, spleen, bone marrow, heart, and some other organs, for example, brain, because they can even permeate the blood-brain barrier. Next slide, please. Speaking on a more general level, there are several human conditions caused by nanoparticles. For example, when they are inhaled for a long time, it is associated with increased risks of pulmonary fibrosis and cancer. Ingesting them has a twofold impact. They act as antimicrobial agents, and on one side, they can cause microbiota imbalance, but on the other side, they can help in oral hygiene because they can prevent selectively inhibit formation of pathogen biofilm. And as was mentioned earlier, nanoparticles can induce inflammation, and since they can permeate blood-brain barrier, they can cause neurological disorders as well. Next slide. All of that was not to say that we shouldn't work with nanoparticles or that they are bad, but rather it was to highlight the need to carefully work with them, and everyone who works with nanoparticles should follow at least 6 simple rules. First, every object in lab should be handled very slowly and carefully, so as not to spill or break something or aerosolize. Second, when working with powders or some solutions that have potential to aerosolize, it all should be done under a fume hood. All synthesis should be done in enclosed reactors, and the person who works should be, so to say, enclosed too. At the very least, a person should wear a helmet, gloves, but it's possibly will be needed for him to wear gloves, to wear goggles, or possibly respirator if the person works with aerosols. Also, while it is very important to keep the space clean, the workspace clean, it is a taboo to dispose nanoparticle waste as regular trash. And finally, common sense rule is to avoid hand-to-mouth contact at all times. Next slide. So in conclusion, it is very important to continue basic scientific research, especially in part of interacting between nanoparticles and subcellular complexes. When certain new nanoparticle is created, we should carefully assess doses and concentrations that we will use. And overall, we should provide thorough risk assessment, including interdisciplinary approach. That's all. Thank you for your attention. I hope that didn't make you feel bad about nanoparticles, because they are still very important and they are a great tool, especially as we will see in the next talks. Thank you.
So is there any questions? So thank you a lot. Yeah, one. So is there any questions? So thank you a lot. Yeah, one.
Please, is there any way to remove nanoparticles from the environment, like carbon nanotubes, if they contaminate the environment?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you. I think that there are definitely such ways. For example, as previously reported, we can filtrate. We can use different mechanisms for that. Environmental contamination is a very important issue in this regard, but I think it was maybe a bit out of scope of my report. Thank you.
About filtrating, I know that there are some technologies for filtrating the air, carbon from air, just from filtrating and making it again like physical material.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please.
Could you tell me this about silver nanoparticles, influence on biological organisms? Because I know some people drink solution with silver nanoparticles in order to prevent smoking.
Well, I think that every nanoparticle case should be studied on case-by-case basis. If there is some evidence of good effect of these silver nanoparticles, then that's okay if people use it, that would. But they bear the same risks as all other nanoparticles, at least, which were shown on the second slide. High reactivity. Yes, I don't know about carcinogenicity of silver nanoparticles because it's mostly related to titanium and carbon. But I think that they can also serve as toxic chemistry depot and release some toxic chemicals like argentium into human body and thus influence badly.
Yeah. Silver nanoparticles are commonly applied because of their different biological effects, as for example, the top one is antimicrobial activity of silver nanoparticles. But mainly, it's also the dose. The dose make nanoparticle toxic, so the dose and exposure, it's of course should be clearly defined before applying to yourself. Yeah. Especially, I think it's not a medicine. It's not registered as a drug. It's like the additives, something like that. But I don't know. So be attentive with such products. Okay, thank you a lot. So please welcome Pauline. Next.
Oh, my pleasure to introduce you.
And
Okay, then it's not my pleasure. Oh, then it's yours.
Okay, so hi everybody. We are happy to continue with Nano Nerds session. And today will learn more about nanotechnology and its application in medicine. So our first speaker, Sasha Grigorovich, please welcome him with the talk of what is quantum dots.
So my name is Sasha Grigorovich and I'm a full student of biomedical engineering. There's nothing remarkable about my scientific career, so I better get to the point. I will tell you about quantum dots, what they are and where they are used. Where should I point? Yeah.
Other way around. Yeah, just
that works. Thank you. Quantum dots are tiny crystals of generally a semiconducting material. And they are known for their optical properties. They shine brightly, they can emit almost in the whole visual spectrum, and they usually are 2 to 10 nanometers in diameter. They consist of a core, usually a semiconducting core, and a semiconducting shell. A shell serves as a gauge for particles in the core, and sometimes they can be kept with a material that can bind to specific molecules, for example, proteins or DNA or something else. So, as you may know, a visible light usually has a wavelength of 450 to 760 nanometers, for which shorter wavelength correspond to blue or even violet light, and longer wavelengths correspond to red light. And a fascinating property of the quantum dots that the color that they emit can be changed solely based on controlling their size. The smallest quantum dots emit in the bluer light, and larger quantum dots emit in the redder light. That happens because of a quantum confinement effect. So, as you may know, a regular semiconductor, they have 3 bands in which electrons have the energy, so to speak. The valence band where the most electrons reside in the resting state, a band gap that the electrons must cross in order to be in the excited state, and the excited state is usually in the conductance band. And they require external energy to do so. For example, a UV lamp can excite the electron, giving it enough energy to cross to the conductance band, and when the electron goes back to the valence band, it emits a certain it may emit light, but the energy might be also dissipated to another electrons or a seed or so on. So, in quantum confinement effect, as was told in the presentation about luminophores, the more we squeeze those particles, the more discrete these energy layers become, and the wider becomes the band gap. So that means that that electrons need more energy to cross this barrier, and they emit a higher energy light when they go back to the resting state. And higher energy light corresponds to shorter wavelengths, because energy is inversely proportional to the wavelength of light. Also quantum dots are called artificial atoms. This is because their properties are closer to atoms than to bulk materials. Next slide. Yeah. Now we'll talk about where they're used and why they're used. The advantages of quantum dots are very low cost. They're very energy efficient. They're very easy to produce. They have excellent optical properties. That means they shine very brightly, and they are also able to bind to specific molecules, which is very useful in biology and medicine. This they can do, as I told you, with German. In tech, you might have heard about quantum dots, LCD, where quantum dots serve as backlight. LED components can be manufactured based on the optical properties of the quantum dots, and quantum dots can be also used in photovoltaics. But the most important use in the context of our conference of our school are in biology and medicine. Quantum dots have a prospective use in medical imaging as contrast agents, for example, for CT or even MRI, for targeted drug delivery, where they can be used to track the metabolism of drugs, and as biosensors. That means they can sense the presence of specific molecules even in small concentrations. For example, they can be used as a sensor for cancer markers, oncomarkers. For example, the ovarian cancer oncomarker. The cancer dots are very specific. It's they can detect this oncomarker in very low concentrations. What is their main limitation is that they are very toxic. Traditional quantum dots are made from cadmium telluride core, and cadmium is very toxic to humans. But there are other options available. Carbon is much less toxic, and quantum dots can be also manufactured based on carbon. I'm guessing that this will be the main type of quantum dots that will be researched and used in biology and medicine. Thank you for your attention.
Is there any question? Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very representative. My question is, if you are familiar, maybe not, with such definition as quantum roots.
Unfortunately not.
Okay, so then no question. Thank you very much for quantum dots.
I would be happy if you can explain this definition to me in a free time.
Actually, I cannot explain because I'm not professional in the field, but I know that quantum dots go together with quantum roots, and that luminescence properties which you described, these brilliant opportunities come from their combination. That was my question. If you have dealt with this pair.
Look more into it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Please welcome Anna Fyodorova. Okay. Thank you. With the talk about drug delivery with nanoparticles.
Hello, my name is Anna, and as you can see, I'm a PhD student in biology and zoology. So I have to confess that I know very, very little about nanoscience, nanoparticles, but I'm also a scientific consultant in pharma industry, so I know some things about drugs and medicine. So I decided to familiarize you and myself too with some basics and principles of using nanoparticles in therapy in clinics. So, in general, as you know, nanoparticles are used for two big purposes in therapy. No, not in therapy, in clinics. It's therapy, which I'm going to talk about, and it's also diagnostics. Diagnostics is about usually about visualization with quantum dots, with MRI, and so on. But let's talk about therapy. For therapy, nanoparticles are important for protection and delivery. In terms of protection, we usually talk about such properties as size and type of material. We are used to thinking about nanoparticles as something very, very little, and that's true. Nanoparticles have to be little, have to be small to travel the body. But they also have to be big enough to carry sufficient amount of cargo, which is actually drug, and not to be vanished from the organism by kidneys, for example. And also, type of material is important. I'm not going to dive in this moment because Ivana had already told you about types of nanoparticles, but for today the most common in therapy are lipid-based, polymeric, inorganic, and some other. So protection means protection of the drug inside the body, and this leads to the stability and high solubility of cargoes, and also for prolonged circulation, and of course the high efficacy of this drug. And the more interesting for me is delivery, because when we're talking about delivery, we usually talk about different charges on the surface of the nanoparticle, different functional groups, different coatings, and the most interesting is targeted ligands, which are also on the surface of the nanoparticle. Why do we need targeted ligands? Because as we know, most of the diseases are characterized by overexpression of some molecules on the surfaces of the cells. Usually we talk about that in terms of cancer, but many other diseases work the same way. So we need something that can catch this molecule on the surface and have this connection. So nanoparticles with drugs will stay in the targeted organ and will not travel somewhere else in the body. Of course, there is a problem of limiting organs, which also can overexpress these targets, but that's another story. So if we combine all these properties, we can find proper nanoparticles for each type of disease. For example, if we're talking about tumors, we can use neutral and targeted nanoparticles. If we're talking about some disease with where mucosal barriers are sufficient, we're talking about positively charged, small and coated nanoparticles. And while I was preparing this presentation, I was very surprised that for today more than 50 different nanomedicines have been already approved by FDA, and not all of them are for cancer. It's very nice that there are also some medicines for example, neurodegenerative disease like multiple sclerosis, for autoimmune disease like Crohn's disease, and even for some infections. And I'm gonna give you an example of such a medicine, which is Vizidine. I like this example because it's provided by a company I work for, so conflict of interest. And also, this is the first FDA-approved nano-based medicine for wet AMD, which is age-related macular degeneration, the degeneration of retina in the eye. It's very hard, hard disease for a person. So it's nice that there are lots of medicines today, and even nanomedicines also available. It's contain lipid-based nanoparticles with verteporfin, which is photosensitizer. It tends to accumulate in the areas where active neovascularization occurs, which is the case of wet AMD. But the problem is that vertebrapine is hydrophobic, so you can't just inject it into the bloodstream because it will coagulate. So we need to do something with that, and we put this drug inside the lipid nanoparticle. And then, if we have it inside lipid nanoparticle, it will travel safely and accumulate in the eye, and then the drug will be released, and everything is okay. So that's, I guess that's it.
Thank you. Is there any questions? I have a question. What do you think, which is nanoparticle FDA approved of 2021 year is?
Oh, no, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's our vaccines.
Oh, you mean the...
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not drug delivery,
Yes,
but
that's
still
not drug. That's not drug. That's not a
bioactive compound.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
but very similar structure to Visibin, which they have. It's also lipid nanoparticle. Okay, thank you a lot. So please welcome our next speaker, Katerina Muzika. Please come here and explain us about sensor application with nanoparticles.
Hello, dear organizer, dear participants. I would like you to present what happens.
1 second, please.
Nanotech has some information about nanotechnology in sensors application. I represent Kharkiv National University of Radio-Electronics, Department of Biomedical Engineering, and actually I am head of the scientific laboratory of analytical optochemical. Plus, the research interest my colleague of my group is a chemical sensor, especially electrochemiluminescence sensors, and I would like to pay attention that we only one who deal with electrochemiluminescence in Ukraine. Now it's quite interesting and important detection technique. Roche company, for example, in Cinevo laboratory, use this equipment in order to provide immune analysis. So other research interest is the function materials in context of creation of the sensors. And nanotechnology, in order to immobilization, there is different nanomaterials on the surface of the electrode. So, come back to the topic of this short presentation. Which role of nanomaterials in sensors, creation of sensors? As you probably know from the previous speakers, that one of important property of nanomaterials is the surface volume ratio, which is much higher than the surface volume ratio of the macroscopic materials. And you can see from this picture is an example of the cube with the face 4 centimeter, and the surface area is approximately 96 square centimeter. But if we divide this cube on 4 cubes, the surface area increase from 29 centimeter square centimeter, 96 square centimeter to 192 square centimeter. So what happens from the sensor's point of view if the surface area will increase? It means the reactivity also increase, and it's a great advantage from the point of view increasing of the sensitivity of detection. So what is mean sensitivity of detection? It means that it's possible to detect very low amount of some species which in another word is analyte. So what is analyte? Is the substances. It can be some chemical species, biological species. For example, protein, amino acids, some species which is interesting from the point of view, for example, diagnostics or detection early disease. And increasing surface area, we can increase sensitivity. And in combination with transducer, for example, optical transducer, electrochemical transducer, electrochemiluminescence transducer, we can detect a smallest quantity. For example, it's a picomole concentration of the analyte, which is impossible with using other technique. This picture demonstrates example of benefits with using different carbon nanostructures analyte in electrochemical and electrochemiluminescence sensors. So carbon nanotubes, graphenes, and others. So if we increase surface area, what we increase? We can increase loading capacity, as you can see. And what does it mean? It means that we can immobilize on the surface of the electrode more some receptors which later help us to increase selectivity, not only sensitivity but also selectivity. So it's due to the high surface volume ratio, we can increase signal amplification because the signal which will, for example, electrochemical signal or electrochemiluminescence emission will increase with increasing the surface area. So high sensitivity and high selectivity is the measure analytical characteristics which can be improved using nanoparticles in the context of the sensors. So, but also we have some problem which need to be solved. Not so easy, not so in using nanomaterials. As you can see, decision table for nanomaterials in electrochemiluminescence. So, for example, it's silicon nanoparticles, and as you can see from this table, they're using silicon nanoparticles as well as semiconductor nanocrystal, carbon-based material, gold nanoparticles, polymer dots, has advantages and disadvantages. And how much time? No. So I finished. So I mean that we still have a niche for the further research in multidisciplinary area, and the Laboratory of Analytical Optochemitronics open for the students, not only from Kharkiv National University, also from Karazin, located nearby. So you can come back because we have quite modern equipment, and you will have possibility to provide your master, PhD study. So, thank you for attention.
Is there any question? Could you please comment a bit which ligands are you detecting? Is it low molecular molecules, yes, or proteins as well, for example?
Now we focus in the low molecular detection, such amino acid, for example, tryptophan, which is luminescence molecular and quite important from the point of view of diagnostics. And for big molecules, we need to communicate with biologists because big molecule is it's better to use, for example, in context antibody, using antibody because antibody is for big molecule. But also we have a problem with selectivity, and that is why also need to find specialists in other areas.
Exactly true.
Please welcome Maxim Skripnik, who will tell us about how nanotechnology can be applied in dentistry. Please.
So I want to describe you a little bit about the implementation of nanotechnology in dentistry. It's not a secret for anyone that the 21st century is an era of nanomaterials in dentistry and digital technologies. With the invention of nanomaterial, like nanocomposites, it's a special material for filling and for direct restoration. They are very biocompatible compared with the previous one. Also, they have a very good mechanical properties and aesthetic. And the fillers of these composites is nanoparticles. And it depends on the manufacturer and on the material, which size of it and in which conditions they are. Kind of, it can be free molecules or they can be linked in nanoclusters and so on. And nowadays we can prevent tooth extraction and in this way delay implantation of a tooth with this nanomaterials. The next slide also represent other materials that used widely in dentistry. For example, for implantation. Dental implants, all of them, they have an nanocoating, and it also depends from manufacturer. Some of them are coated with nanoparticles of titanium, of nanohydroxyapatites, and most of them have nanopits, nanopapillars, and so on. It depends. And because of it, they have better primary and secondary osteointegration. And also we use nanobone. It's a nanograft for augmentation of heart tissue, kind of bone. If we are planning a procedure of implantation and we are lack of bone, we can use this nanograft to provide a better opportunities for implantation. And also we use topical gels and different medicine for treatment of inflammatory diseases of periodontal structures, kind of gingivitis and periodontitis. And also nanoparticles are widely used in manufacturing of dental bonds and special agent for hypersensitivity treatment. For example, Clean Pro, it's a special bond for treatment of dental hypersensitivity. It's also contains nanoparticles of S3 calcium phosphate, and it's occlude dentinal tubules, for instance, and in this way it's kind of a treatment of this disease. Okay, thank you for attention.
Thank you. Is there any question? Could you comment on the toxicity? Whether it's safe to use nanoparticle?
Which one do you mean? The dental composite?
Yeah.
No, they're not toxic. I think that everyone.
They were stable there? So
yeah, everyone.
You are not exposed to.
Everyone can have them. Just a few.
Super, thank you. And so please welcome Anastasia Koidan. Last but not least, with her talk, we already starting to build a bridge to the computer science. Yeah? How? Please explain.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Anastasia Koidin, and I'm a student of the Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, and I'm by Institute of High Technologies. And I'm interested in optical spectroscopy, web data analysis, and some different types of synthesis nanoparticles, such as chemical and physical. And recently I had a research work in projects which is named Features of Interaction of Different Types, Interaction of Nanoparticles with Viruses and Different Types of Microorganisms. And according to this project, we needed to characterize some properties of nanocolloids, and we decided to develop a web application which can help to analyze these properties. So the topic of my presentation is a web application for nanoparticle properties and their analysis. And the first question for everybody is why do we need an application? And the main point of that is that extensive research is required to develop a synthesis protocol and analyze of material properties or some parameters. And everyone knows that data analysis always incredibly time consuming. So it is clear that automation is important and better when we have the same algorithm to analyze some properties and when we have a large number of samples. So we do it automation, did it. And our goal is to develop and implement a web application that will perform such analysis and save our research valuable time. I think that we know that some options can affect the parameters of nanoparticles. For example, temperature, reagents concentration, time of heating, pH value, and additional illumination significant influence in it. So it is necessary to monitor the changes and monitor the difference in the properties of nanoparticles. So our app performs analysis of the uploaded experimental data. For example, it could be an Excel file, and displays the results as a graph that you can see on pictures below. And for example, on these pictures, it is characteristics of argentum and our nanoparticles or partial nanoparticles, which were received by dynamic light scattering and were measured by Zetasizer Nano. And I would like to present you our results and some functions that would be illustrates which by our application. With it, you may change the graph scale, access titles, graph title for each graph separately or together, and use the parameters side panel on the right to change the parameters of all the graphics, for example, limits of x-axis or titles of x-axis and title for graphs. Also, you can save each graph separately in PNG format by download button, or you can use the another button, save all graphs, to save all graphs together. And as a result, you can output results as a TXT file with the summary of the key sample properties, which which can represent to you evaluated properties and evaluation of the similarity of samples if it is applicable. So, if you want to ask something or collaborate with us, I give you my contacts. And it is all for today.
file your program is using. It depends on the equipment you use.
Because we received our data by the synthesizer Nano, which automation saved some parameters to Excel file, and we download it to the application and look on it and work with it. It's just
would be interesting if you take other equipment for dynamic, like scattering. Would it be applicable?
Yeah. We will try to improve our application for another techniques and another equipment.
Okay, thank you. So with this talk, we finish our Nano Nerds session. I would like to thank all our participants, to Nano Nerds first for your very nice and understandable presentation. And IE Nerds, you are welcome to ask back Nano Nerds if something was not clear or to fuel new discussions and investigations. So we make a very short pause.